like to call the work session to order, July 1st, 2021. Brandon, we're all here except Brandon, and he's going to be on the telephone. So I'm pleading to all of you, if I don't remember or don't say it, let me know, okay? So we don't have that. We have one item on the agenda tonight. I would like to remind council that staff will be pausing intermittently to answer any question. Are we checking to see if he's on the phone? Hello behind the door? Brandon? Oh, we'll try later then, okay. Number one, this item is a discussion on potential process changes and fee revisions. And of course, Katie Wilkin, first speaker. Katie?
Mayor, I'm going to just kick it off if I may.
Oh, of course you would.
Sure.
See, they put your name below hers.
Sure.
You need to talk to them.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Mayor. Council, good to see you all tonight. Thank you very much for attending on a sort of an off night, if you will. We're bringing this back for further discussion and follow-up from the work session that took place on June 14th with regard to fees. There was a lot of conversation about the planning fees and so forth. And so what we're really looking to do is Katie's going to run through the presentation and stop intermittently on the different points so we can have a conversation and seek your policy direction. Because I know that Doug in the back.
Oh, he's right there.
Yes, ma'am. We're tentatively scheduled to bring the fees back for council adoption on July 12th. And so back to council on July 12th. And so what we'd like to do is, obviously, these are part of that process. So any sort of revisions that council may choose to make in terms of process changes, which changes the fees, or subsidize, if you will, lowering the fees, obviously makes a difference to what Doug does on that. And then, as I understand it, Doug, please correct me if I misspeak here, we can always lower the fees tonight. We just can't increase them because then that would require a new advertising effort and so on and so forth. So all we're talking about tonight is potential process changes or subsidies to lower fees, not proposing to increase anything.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. And with that, I'll just turn it over to Katie.
Thank you. We have, oh, yes.
Are you going to use Almo?
No.
Can you put it, if you don't mind, I'd like to.
Does that work? Hi.
There you go, Bill.
Thank you. So we just have 3 fees to discuss with you tonight that are follow-up from the last discussion we had. But I did just want to take a point, since, I have the time tonight, that I think you might remember from our last discussion that when they updated the fees in 2010, the planning fees only included staff time for the planners, even though many of our other departments have significant parts to play. And as you know, in the last 5 years or so, we've been doing a lot with our process improvements. So we do have a few fees that are being lowered, and it's directly due to some of our process improvements. So I just wanted to take a couple minutes and just point that out. So those include our residential design review. Our current fee is $1,250, and it's being lowered to $401. Our residential design review, it's currently $2,500, and that's being lowered to $1,052. And then our model home complex fee review, it's just a little bit lower, $550 to $537. And that's due to a lot of our process improvements. It's also due to those of you who were on council at the time remember that I think it was 2014 we did an update to our design guidelines that council asked us to do, and you can see these design reviews that greatly impacted. It made our design reviews a lot simpler.
Yes.
But then our staff has also done a lot of work and working with our home builders, especially in that residential design review process. So we have reduced some of our fees. So the first one we wanted to talk about that council asked us to bring some more information back was on the use permit fee. One question council had was just how much staff time does it take? And that quick answer is it's about 107 hours of all staff time to review and process a use permit. And we compared that fee, the proposed fee is $7,227, whereas the average of the comparison cities is $1,170. I do want to point out that we looked at a lot of the other cities, and a lot of the other cities use use permits for uses such as things like tattoo parlors or pawn shops. A lot of cities require those be separated from others. City of Goodyear does too, but we do that through an administrative zoning permit, which is proposed to be $250. So our fees are somewhat lower and an easier process compared to other cities because we do some of these reviews as an administrative zoning permit, where some cities would take that to council. However, when we talked about the use permit fees last time, we specifically got on the topic of drive-throughs. And it was requested at this work session, we discussed drive-throughs. So staff did do some research. 70% of the use permits that we do are drive-through restaurants. And we did look at other cities. Goodyear and Glendale are the only two cities that require use permit for a drive-through restaurant when it's in a C2 type zoning district, whereas the rest of the comparison cities do not. I do want to note, though, some of these comparison cities do require use permit if it's in one of their downtown districts, or if it's in more of if it's in proximity to residential. There might be certain conditions in which a use permit's required, but in just a general commercial shopping center, they do not require a use permit. I should note, too, there are some places in the city of Goodyear that there are some PEDs where drive-throughs are permitted, such as the market at Estrella Falls. We don't require use permit in there because that's how the PED was written. So basically for use permits, we came up with, council has 4 options. Option 1 would be to adopt the 100% cost recovery fee, which is $7,227. Option 2 would be to adopt a lower fee. So for instance, if we wanted to keep our current fee of $3,100, that would be a annual subsidy of about $57,000. If council wanted to further lower the fee to be the same as the average of the comparison cities, which is $1,170, that would represent an annual subsidy of $85,000. Option 3 would be to change the process and have use permits approved by Planning and Zoning Commission. About half of the cities that we compare to do this. The use permits stop at Planning Commission. If we did that, the 100% cost recovery fee would be $6,129. So we could lower the fee slightly by stopping it at commission. Option 4 would be to not require use permit for drive-throughs. So that means most of our use permits wouldn't be necessary. In the last 2.5 years, that would mean only the Harley-Davidson freeway pylon sign and 2 car washes would have required a use permit. So basically it just takes that fee burden off of most of the required use permits. So this is a place where we wanted to pause and open it up for council questions and discussion.
Council, who would like to start?
I'll start.
Joe?
You know, I think first of all, I don't want to hurt any of our restaurants coming, okay? Because I think that's where a lot of, at least I hear on the outside, where people want. And I think unfortunately, because of the pandemic and some of the other issues, you're going to see more drive-throughs. But my concern with just giving it up is that I know there's a couple places within the city that the drive-throughs, to be honest with you, are an issue. You know, I think of the one there with Popeyes and the Starbucks on how sometimes that gets all backed up. So I'm kind of toying between, I still want to see to make sure that flow is good and we don't get into the problem of having backup with neighboring businesses and that type of stuff. So, and from a price standpoint, I want us to be competitive with the other cities. I don't want to discourage a restaurant coming here because of those fees jumping up to what they are. So that's my 2 cents.
Bill?
So from because really what we're talking about is process now. at that point. So how do we solve that issue? I mean, I think that's the reason that we're seeing use permits today, is because 2 years ago, or when the last time you came back with this, it was, we want to see these because we're having these problems. And we approved Starbucks and Popeyes and the Taco, I mean, so we did the damage. So I don't know how much worse, and don't take this offense, I don't know how much worse staff can make it than what we've already done. But, so how do we solve that problem to keep the use permit from rising all the way to this level?
So, Mayor, may I?
Go ahead.
Katie, feel free to jump in here, but one thing, if the queuing and the traffic is the concern of council and the sole reason that you want to see them, and Rourke may jump in as well, what we want to do is have a standard to review to, which we currently have. And one thing that we would not want to put council in the position of doing is sort of saying, well, on this drive-through, we want a longer one, but on this one, it's okay to have a shorter one. So we need to be very similar in how we approach this issue of queuing. And if the queuing is the real issue for council, I mean, we can take a look at that, best practices, work with our colleagues in the engineering department. We do currently already have a queuing standard, and Katie, what is it, 150 feet?
Yeah, it's 5 cars.
5 cars, yeah.
It's
And
nothing.
Which is probably outdated in
Right.
today's world.
right, so we can take a look at that for sure and change that standard for sure. I mean, to Councilman Pizzillo's point, I think the nature of the world has changed in regards to drive-throughs. And so it may be something we can look at. If we increase that and increase more drive-through capacity, then it sounds like the concern of council then would dissipate, if that makes sense.
It does. So from my perspective, just to finish that thought then, I think that was, for me, that was a reason to continue to hold final say. But if we have a better standard in place that allows that to go without council needing to see it, and quite honestly, I think the last discussion we had was Wally's favorite donut shop, which seemed to have a long enough queue. It was the exiting part of that, but we approved it anyway. So I think we've seen some recent examples where we really don't need to be necessarily involved in that. So I would be supportive of us getting council out of that process, as long as we have something that backstops it, that solves the problem, that updates the queuing, because 5 cars, that is not going to be nearly enough. And I think we've got a couple of examples in the city where we're all hearing or have observed any one of the Dutch Bros or any one of these other ones that we've tucked into the middle of somewhere has created problems. As far as the fee itself is concerned, I guess you would just have to question if the average, and I think Katie said was 1,100 and change of use permits. I did a rough calculation, about 1,300, but either way, but our fee is 7,200. So I think we have to ask ourselves, why are we almost 7 times more, or 5 times more than everybody else when it comes to this particular fee? Are we putting that much more staff time in than everybody else is?
Mayor, if I may,
Yes, you may.
I think that's an excellent question. Thank you for asking it. We don't know how the other cities arrived at their fees. They may have taken the approach as if we did previously, it was just capturing planning time. But we're capturing, essentially what it boils down to is, regardless of what's a use permit or a straight rezoning or anything of that nature, to bring things all the way through application review, planning commission hearings, and council hearings is roughly $8,000. Regardless, it doesn't matter what title you put on it. That is just what it costs to capture everybody's time that's involved in the reviewing.
And can I add to that?
Please.
That is also average. So for example, I gave you the examples of the non-drive-through use permits we do. One was the Harley-Davidson freeway pylon sign. We did not spend $7,000 worth of staff time reviewing that because it's a sign, there's no traffic report. We looked at the information, compared it to heights similar, and then you know, you all did basically a design review almost on it, you know, and looking at other signage. So, you know, but since when we're doing the user fee, we have to use the average of all of our cases, and that was like one of 20 we looked at, it doesn't count. But now if that becomes one of, you know, those are the type of things that become use permits, it could make sense to have a lower fee.
So with that, then I would be supportive of leaving the fee as it is at 3,100 and then fixing the process to get council out of the special use permit as long as we fix this queuing issue, because I think that's our big issue. That's where I stand.
Jerry?
Well, I think both Bill and Joe made some really, really good points here. And it's really kind of two issues. I think, Katie, you hit it on the head. What these were designed for is not the world we're in today. Because it's not just the queuing. When you have the queuing, then people can't use the parking spaces for the restaurant. They can't get in and out, or they get trapped in there, and then you have people driving just crazy through these parking lots. Like Popeyes is a good example. When that thing queues all the way around, that takes all their parking spaces. No one can park there. So I think that is a procedure that we need to look at for assuming that some higher level of drive-through is where we're going for the next decade or so. I would assume that's probably a habit that people are going to want to keep, even for some of your more sit-down restaurants, I assume, have now done takeaway. And so you may see more requests for drive-throughs on some of those generally more sit-down type restaurants, not just your fast food. So I think we have to keep that in mind. So I think that's a good plan. And at this point, I do like to see them because I like to kind of see what's going on with everything. The other part is with regard to the fees. I want to make sure we are competitive with our neighboring cities, because with some of these restaurants, they're not going to have as many locations on every corner. We've seen that. You know, they're going to have maybe, if they're going to pick between us and Buckeye for their restaurant to capture that portion of the population, I want them to pick Goodyear. Having said that, I'm okay with, because you said this about the $1,170 would be more akin to kind of put us right with everybody else.
That's the average fee of the comparison cities.
Yeah, somewhere around there. I'm okay with subsidizing because I think the difference between that and the fee we have now is like $30,000. And, you know, I think to get these businesses here and to stay competitive, I'm okay with that subsidy there. So those are just kind of the areas I kind of look at.
Laura?
Has the current fee as is been a barrier to drive-throughs coming in here? Has there been any discussion about our cost is too prohibitive?
Mayor, if I may, I haven't heard that anybody made a decision to not locate in Goodyear because of the use permit fee. But in all fairness, I will say we have had some discussions with potential customers about the use permit process that takes 4 months. So they're like, oh, well, we have to go in front of planning commission and council. It's uncertainty for the development community or the restaurant community. Plus it's an additional 4 or 5 months of time before they're open. So that is what really is what the discussion turns on, not so much, at least in the conversations that I've had, if the fee is $7,000 or $5,000. That's not the discussion, it's the time to open.
Okay, so if we take it out of council, then it would shorten the time process.
Very much, yeah, you'd cut 4 to 5, maybe 6 months off.
Okay.
Everything would be open that much sooner.
Now, would there still be a traffic study for people getting a drive-through?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and they would pay for that? Who pays for that?
The developer.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And if we eliminate the drive-through restaurants, what other things would require a use permit besides signs and car washes? Does public storage or self-storage fall under there?
Yes, the public storage requires a use permit. Like if someone wants to operate a daycare out of their residential home, that requires a use permit if they hit a certain number of kids. I'm trying to think.
I'm sorry.
That's the major.
Yeah, I think that's the major one.
Yeah.
I was halfway listening to you, so I'm sorry.
Well, I agree with Council Member Stipp. If we take council out of it and shorten the time period and shorten the cost, then you could have a fee that was more commensurate with the expenses for the non-drive-through type of activities. So for the other purposes that wouldn't require as much staff time, then you could have an adjusted fee.
Wally?
So are we talking about just doing away with the drive-in user fee and lowering the other user fees? Are we talking about two different things here?
What I'm hearing is that it sounds like we're leaning toward setting the fee at the average fee, $1,170,
And
but also taking away the requirement for
For
a
the
use
drive-through?
permit for a
Okay, and so that
drive-through.
1,000, that's for all of the communities around us? That's
Right.
not just us in Glendale?
Right, see, you can see all the others.
No,
So
I'm
Buckeye,
sorry.
Phoenix, Peoria, Glendale. If you
Okay.
average those out, it's 1,170.
All right. Well, I am joining everyone else. My concern always has been the queue. It's just some of the drive-throughs that we've stuck in our shopping centers have caused more problems than I think we thought that they would, especially the Dutch Brothers and really even McDonald's is a nightmare because if that drive-through line gets too long, you can't even park near McDonald's to walk in if you wanted to. So if we could just perhaps find out what other cities use for their determination for a drive-through, how much they queue possibly, or what their minimum requirements are, I think that would help us. And then I'm in favor of not having a fee for a drive-in. Like Sherry, I'd like them all to come here in Goodyear, because we certainly have enough room for them. And truthfully, Christopher, we wouldn't know if someone didn't want to pay our fee, because they're not going to come back to us and say, oh, well, I've got this and I've got to go get a user fee and they want another $3,000 or $5,000, so I'm going to go someplace else. Because time is money, and the fees are a lot of money for some of these developers that are just, getting started, or the mom and pops that want to get a standalone. So anyway, I'm for to be average with everyone else. I don't want to be above anybody. I'd like to be right in the ballpark with everyone and then not use a user fee for drive-ins.
No, Joe. Joe? Oh, Brandon,
I got a comment.
welcome.
Yeah, do you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So I agree with everybody else. I do like streamlining processes and saving time for the user. If we give it to staff, which I'm okay with, we just got to make sure that that it's set up correctly, that we have flexibility, like with the queuing, the exits, the direction of the drive-throughs, just things like that, because every drive-through is not created equal, like everybody mentioned as well, with Dutch Brothers versus the dog food drive-through in Goodyear. So there's just I don't know how the flexibility needs to be in who the user is to decide how big or long those are going to be, but I'm not sure how to do that, because we want every business to be successful in Goodyear, but we can't guarantee that with those certain users. So hope they all do well, but I just want to make sure that we don't create any backups and things like that. So I'm okay streamlining the process. I want to be competitive with our peers, but I think the biggest bang for the buck is going to be shortening the timeline for the user. So I'm on board with shorten the time and streamline the process, getting it out of our hands, but having robust direction or guidance for staff to follow, and then being in line with our peers for price.
Joe?
Okay.
No, I'm in
Okay.
agreement, consensus. I prefer the average, the 1,100, so that we're not, we're at least in the ballpark with the others, And if you can get the process, like I say, my biggest concern of all this is we don't have to do it, but my biggest concern is the queuing, because I think 5 cars really is not enough. And some of the examples I had mentioned before, it's a nightmare with some of them. And I think the trend is now Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, a lot of people just don't want to go in and mix, so they're going to the drive-throughs, so those lines are getting longer. And I think it's interfering with other businesses as well to get that through. So you come up with something to cover that, then I'm fine.
Mayor, may I add one thing? Katie, would you mind going to the options and discussion slide for just a second, please? Thank you. On option number 4, with the do not require use permits, meaning it doesn't go to planning commission or council, there would be no cost to the restaurant facility at all, just for clarification. The costs would only apply in coming before planning commission and or council. Because if we backed council out of the process and commission out of the process, they would just immediately go to site plan and would meet the standards that we would ultimately propose, that you all would have a chance to see. So this would be a zoning text amendment that would come through with some new standards. And to Vice Mayor Hampton's comments, we would build some flexibility into that, because we have had conversations with some drive-throughs who do not want a double lane or do not want 20 cars in there because they just don't, that is not their business model for whatever reason. And I can't explain that, but they just said, no, we're not going to do that. But we don't want to use our regulations to run off a business like that either. So what we may do is build in some flexibility of dual lanes or more than, now I'm making stuff up, 8 or 10 cars. Again, I'm just making it up for example. But if somebody wants to do something different than that, then they could go to planning commission and council so that they have the opportunity to move forward, and you would have the opportunity to evaluate something different than the norm, if that makes sense.
This is my turn. I agree with many things the council have stated, but the one that does bother me is the landowner and the developer. So how does one make sure that we have dug into it and found that, all the area throughout Goodyear and look to see about the planning? Maybe some of them won't take a drive-in, period. So I like drive-throughs, and I thought the Chick-fil-A, they've done a good job when they had to. Doesn't turn the people away. Doesn't not one, there are, and they've just been voted one of the best restaurants, top award. So I worry about that. And I wonder how much limitation on pieces of property this is going to bring. So
It's a great question.
a developer has planning in 3 or 4, and now he can't, so he's got to replace it. So what is he going to replace it with? Because a restaurant can't replace with much.
Right.
And so that's my concern, all right, when we talk about this. And I understand how people feel. I've been in the line, but does it stop me from going there? Absolutely not. And so wherever they build the coffee places, I don't care how many paths how many places there's more than they can't plan. Those businesses are top businesses, and people are going to take, but of course it opens up the door and the telephones complaints to us. And I understand it. But are we ready to give up a lot of very creative drive-ins and things that they have in the future for us? I'm not so sure. So that's where my stickler is on this.
Okay.
Any other comments? I think we're ready to go on. Does this help you? Did you get?
Yes, if I can wrap up, the consensus we heard was change the process, but also the standards and have some flexibility, I think is what we heard. And also adopt it.
We'll set the fee at $1,170, so that's the immediate action for council at July 12th.
Until we do the zoning text amendment.
Right, then we'll discuss this in more detail of what the standard should be at the zoning text amendment.
So what's next?
All right, so the next item is preliminary plats. So we didn't discuss this at the last work session we held, but council did ask us specifically to take another look at all of our fees and see if there were any other fees where we were much higher than the other cities. And we did that with the planning and zoning fees, and that's where we were like, hey, some of them were lower, this is great, but preliminary plat is the one that stood out to us as well, where we are higher than average. So this is an example of a 100-lot subdivision. The comparison cities worked out to be $5,789, and Goodyear worked out to be $8,530. And again, this is one where we have different options. I mean, we're going to go over the options of we can just adopt it as is, or we can subsidize, or we can change the process. So again, we did look at some of the other comparison cities, and there's 3 cities that have preliminary plats approved by staff: Peoria, Phoenix, and Chandler. And then there's another set of cities that Planning and Zoning Commission approved the preliminary plat: Buckeye, Glendale, Mesa, Gilbert, and Scottsdale. And then Goodyear, Avondale, Surprise are the 3 cities that have preliminary plats go all the way through council. So if the preliminary plat was approved at staff level, the fee would be $4,687. So that would be 20% lower than the average city. So we would actually be one of the lower fees. It would also save the applicants 2 months in the process. If it stopped at Planning and Zoning Commission approval, the fee would be $7,604, which is 30% higher than the average, but it's at least a little lower, and that would save about 2 weeks off the process for the applicants. And then again, the council approval is $8,530, which is 47% higher than the average. So again, looking at our options, option 1 would be to adopt the 100% cost recovery with our current process. Option 2 would be to, if we just wanted to lower the fee but keep the current process, we could subsidize. The last couple of years, we've had about 16 cases per year, so that would work out to about $44,000 a year in subsidy if we made the fee the average of the other cities. Option 3 would be adopt 100% cost recovery and having Planning Commission approve the preliminary plats, which would be $7,604. And then option 4 would be to make preliminary plats an administrative process, which would set the fee at $4,687. And again, I'm just using the example of a 100-lot subdivision. That's what we used in our example. So the fees can vary depending on the size of the plat. And so we want to pause here again for discussion and questions.
Thank you. Brandon, I'm going to start this discussion with you. Brandon?
With me?
Yes.
Yeah,
I'll give you the first one on the floor. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was trying to listen to all the options. I want to be competitive just like the other one. So I guess whatever that looks like. I think it was option 3. That's the one.
2.
We're still competitive.
Yeah,
with,
number 2.
2. Okay. Yeah, that we're still competitive with the other cities, and I think that would probably be the better one.
Thank you, Brandon. Next.
Yeah.
Oh, you're not done? I think he's done. Who wants to?
I'm good. I'm done.
Joe?
If I recall, we've had this discussion before. And the reason why we went with the council, because it's my understanding the preliminary plat is really the only time we have any input. If we pass off on the preliminary plat, the problem is when the final comes, it's pretty much if they met the preliminary, then there's not a whole lot we can do. And that's what I recall of our discussion we had a while back. And that's why we put it on the preliminary plat. So, to me, I just hate to give up that responsibility of ours to make sure the preliminary plat is set, to give it up to zoning or whatever the case would be, because that's why we had talked about that. Because if they meet the preliminary, then when it comes to the final, that's why they're usually always on the consent agenda. But I still want us to be competitive, so if it requires us to lower the fees, then so be it. But I just don't feel comfortable giving that responsibility up from my perspective.
I do want to, the city attorney can jump in too and add, but I do want to mention that rezoning is really the place where we would make changes, because the job of the preliminary plat, basically a preliminary plat is kind of the same as a site plan, where we're just making sure that the layout meets the requirements that are already set. We're not supposed to be creating new requirements at preliminary plat. It's just confirming that it meets our current standards. Again, Roar could jump in more and explain it more, but if there's something that's of concern or we want to add new regulations or standards, rezoning is the best place to do that. But of course, we'll follow whatever process council.
Let me hear from the attorney. I'm just trying to get an understanding, because I know we had this discussion before, and it's almost like that was the time, if I'm incorrect, please let me know, that was the time if we had a problem with the preliminary plat, that's when we could give input. Because once you get that done, the final is pretty much a stamp, if they meet what the preliminary plat was.
Yeah, Councilmember Bazil, you're absolutely right in the fact that you really can't modify in the final plat what was approved in the preliminary plat. As long as you're in conformance with the requirements placed on the preliminary plat, you're generally required to approve the final plat. So you can't substantively make changes on the final plat. Katie's right too. If you're really talking about uses of land or that type of requirement, that really should be in the zoning. I think there's kind of some middle area as far as what you can require in the preliminary plat, which is really just the subdivision of land. You've already approved the use, and you've approved standards, city standards consistent with that use. And we're really just dividing up the lots and circulation patterns and that sort of thing. Now, there's some gray area in there as far as the street going this way or that way, or some setbacks and that sort of thing. But you're right. If you want input on how that neighborhood looks and how those lines are drawn on the map, you're going to need to have that input at the preliminary plat stage. Use, that's a zoning question.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was getting to. At the preliminary plat, would you also talk about any benefits as far as open space? Would that be in the preliminary plat? The setbacks?
You're going to have standards. Setbacks are generally established in your zoning. Open space standards are generally established in your zoning, but location within that plat can come into play.
That could vary inside that preliminary plat, though, right? Okay, yeah, that's what I thought the discussion was. I just want to make sure I understand it clearly. I understand what Katie's saying, but if we give that up on council, then where is our input as far as that is concerned? So I still have that same concern, unless the others can convince me otherwise. I still have that same concern to have some input on preliminary plans.
Sherry?
I think I have the same. I think I have the same concern Joe does, because I think that's when we do some of the little tweaking is at the preliminary plat. Like, can we move this space over here and make a bigger park, or that type of thing, access for fire, can we add, that's all happened in the preliminary plat, right?
Correct.
Okay, yeah, so because those are kind of areas that I do still like to have some input on, and I know those sometimes, like Bill might come up with something that I didn't think about at the preliminary plan. It's like, yeah, that's something that we need to add, and it always seems like we work with the developers at that point, and they say, yeah, we can add that stipulation, or we can add that. So I am okay with that, keeping it, but perhaps subsidizing the fees. My only question would be, when we're talking about 100, it's hard for me to get a grasp on, because I know you used an average of 100. What is the average number of lots that comes through on one plat? Just ballpark?
Oh.
A lot of our, lately in the last, 5-6 years, a lot of them have been in the 100, 150, I'd say, size.
Yeah.
They're like, Estrella used to do like 300-400 lot plats.
Okay.
Mayor, if I may?
Yes, you may.
And before I start to answer that question, if I can point out one thing, there are 2 number 2s on the slide.
Yeah,
Oh,
we
no,
saw that.
sorry.
That's okay.
Thank you.
So the last one should be 4, which comes after 3.
I like 2A, 2 first. Yeah, I think that, for me, that's the idea. I was just trying to get an idea when you say 100, so I can kind of, in my head, figure out what the subsidy would be.
Right.
If it's about 100, that makes sense then.
So typically what we've seen after, as a result of the Great Recession, the amount of land that builders and financial institutions are willing to take on risk on has shrunk. And so, to Katie's point, Goodyear used to see plats of much broader scale. Typically now, I'm agreeing with her, but they're often 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 lots. Very few projects do we see have 200 or 300. It's usually between that 60 and 100, and oftentimes even closer to the 60 number than the 100. So that's typically kind of what the scale is. Now, of course, we all know the housing market's kind of going crazy these days, and so the scale may ramp up again, but typically it's close to that 60, 80 number.
Well, I'm for 2A. And I guess the subsidy kind of work out what is fair, so we're kind of in the ballpark.
Wally?
Well, I agree with Joe and Sherry, and I like adopt lower fee and subsidize it, because once that land is built or developed or whatever, we're going to make up whatever we're subsidizing, if it's a profitable business or even homes for us. But it was interesting, the 3 cities that have council approval are Buckeye, Surprise, and us, and we're the only 3 cities that really have a lot of land left, while the other cities don't have a lot of land to develop. They do a lot of infilling. So I really want to have the ability to take a look at where these preliminary plots are going to go, to see if we're growing in the right direction, to see if we're doing what we really want to do. So I don't want to give up that
Bill?
oversight.
Thank you.
Yeah, I tend to agree with the, I don't want to give that up just yet, philosophy. But I definitely want to lower the fee. If you go back to the slide that has I was going to do the math really quick. If you take out Chandler at 1570, which is extraordinarily low for everybody else, that average raises up quite a bit.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, it looks, again, just quick, but it looks like about 6,500, I think, is about average. So we're definitely behind at 3,000, but I don't know that going to 8,500 is really the route either. I think that's way too high. So I would, if we can find the average, I'm trying to stall, maybe someone's doing math, but I'm seeing that neither one of the finance people are back there doing this, so.
The average without Chandler.
Yeah, the average without Chandler. Whatever that works out to would kind of be favorable for me, because I think Chandler's throwing it off. Because for whatever reason, they're just an anomaly on that sheet. But I would like to not be the top dog on any of these fees. And I think that's the way to get us to the middle. Throw Chandler out, and then let's see where we're at.
Yes, my turn. Oh, I'm sorry, Laura, I'm sorry.
I was thinking about that development next to Aldi where we had the discussion about a tot lot. And was that a rezone? Because I feel like some of these more robust conversations are on the rezone. What's going to look like? What amenities are they going to have?
Mayor, if I may, the recollection is, and Katie, correct me if I misspeak, but I believe it was during the rezoning process.
Yeah. Sorry. Oh, you're doing the math, sorry.
I think that conversation about the tot lot took place at the rezoning.
The rezoning.
Yes, ma'am.
Because it seems that when we have community engagement, when we're talking about buffers, when we're talking about what the impacts are going to be on the neighbors, has been rezoning. And I'm just trying to recall what kind of robust conversations we've had about preliminary plats. Because the tot lots always seem to come up, maybe it was the rezone, but I haven't been on as council as long as everybody else.
And Mayor, if I may, just
Sure may.
to add just a little bit of context to Councilmember Cano's comment. Rezonings, as you all know, require public hearings, sign posting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Preliminary plats do not require any public notice. So it's purely engineering and development services and our colleague sister department to review, and then planning commission non-public hearing and council non-public hearing. And the crack staff has calculated the numbers. If we drop Chandler out of the equation, the fee would be $62.57. That would be the average fee. Thank you.
Thank you for that number. The sentence that really alerted me is it shortens it 2 weeks. So when you said that,
2 weeks if it stops at commission, 2 months if it stops at staff.
well, that's pretty good. Do you think the developers and builders will like that? See,
Yeah.
to
Is
me, I
Jackson
think
here?
that's, now, I'm not disagreeing, I'm not disagreeing with council said on the preliminary plat, those things really, and lowering that price a little bit. But there's where my focus is. And also, when you think about that, that affects the delivery date also to the customer. So it does a combination. So that's my input for tonight. All right.
So, Mayor, if I may encapsulate this, what I heard the consensus is subsidize the fee, dropping Chandler out of the equation, so it would be $62.57. Just want to make sure I heard that correctly.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And council still is the final say-so.
Yes, ma'am. Same process.
Okay.
Planning Commission, staff review, Planning Commission, council, fee is $62.57.
Okay, Katie, you have the floor.
The final fee we have to discuss is that PED rezone fee, which we had started discussing at the last work session. So with this one, I think the direction we got from council at the time was, hey, can you look at those PEDs and see if there's something we need to do to reduce the number of PEDs that we need? So I looked at the last, since the beginning of 2019, the last 2.5 years, and we've done 18 PEDs. 11 of those were multifamily, and the biggest thing they wanted to change was the building height. 3 of them were single family, and I should mention one of those single family was a really simple change that we just made in the ordinance. And so we wouldn't have counted that. We would have still counted that as a hard rezoning because there wasn't like a PD book to review. It was just like, hey, they wanted a little change here, and we did it within the adopting ordinance. And so we still have that flexibility when there's common sense of this is the process. 2 of them were industrial, and again, it was the height that made them want to go into the PED zoning. And then there were 2 completely unique PEDs. The Civic Square PED is exactly what we'd be looking at. And then also the Pebble Creek Pickleball was a unique thing that we don't see very often.
Yes,
And don't touch that,
very
right?
unique, so we don't want to bother that one at all.
And it does seem that the changes we make to our zoning ordinance do have an impact. I just wanted to share that big change we did to add those smaller lot sizes a few years ago. Before that change, 7% of our zoning cases were hard zoning cases. After that, since that change, 47% of our cases have been hard zoning. So it made a significant impact to add those zoning districts. So looking at these options, I'd say that option 1 would be to adopt the 100% cost recovery fee, in which we are higher than the other cities. Option 2 would be lower the fee or subsidize the fee. I would ask that if council were going to do that, we would set it at the same fee as our hard zoning fee, just to make the fee collection easier, that they're the same fees. And then based on how many PEDs we do today, that would be about $24,000 a year in subsidy. Option 3 would be it could be in conjunction with either option 1 or option 2, would be to direct staff to process a zoning text amendment. This is a guess, but my thought is if we allowed taller buildings in the multifamily and industrial zoning districts, we would reduce the need for PEDs even further, and we might get it down to just 2 or 3 PEDs a year. I took a quick look. I mean, I didn't do a big analysis. I took a quick look at other cities, and it does seem that a lot of the other cities in their higher multifamily district allow for more height than we allow. And a lot of the cities do allow for more industrial height. As you know, our zoning ordinance was last done 22 years ago.
Wow.
And so the height is 50 foot. And 22 years ago, I mean, we've seen so many changes in automation.
Oh, yeah.
The need for taller buildings in industrial has become clear. And so, again, I think that focusing on that multifamily and industrial building height could possibly reduce the need for PUD zoning if that's the approach council wanted to take. So that is another place to pause and ask for.
Mayor,
Yes.
may I just add one thing? I didn't know Jackson was back here in the audience, so thank you for attending, Jackson. But one of the points that Katie made, I think, is really, really important, and we appreciate council's cooperation, but I really want to give a great deal of kudos and thanks to Jackson. If you remember when we created those smaller lot sizes, we did so by consulting with Jackson on what could we do to make things easier for the development community, easier for ourselves as well. And after some discussions, we came up with the smaller lot sizes. And if you remember, we have the menu of enhancements in order to mitigate that. So that has really paid off. I mean, to go from 7% of all zoning cases as PADs to just 7% is really a dramatic change. And we did that in partnership with Jackson, and I just want to thank him for his time and effort on that.
Great. Brandon, I don't think I asked you to weigh in on this one. Pardon me? Oh, sorry. It sounded like you were. Are we ready? Not read?
So Katie, tell us again what you're asking us to do, because we already forgot.
Just put your hand up and say, I can talk.
So again, we're kind of talking about the fee, but also the process. And when we talked last time, it was,
Thank you, Bill.
can we reduce the need for PADs? And I guess with option 3, it's kind of not related to the fees in some ways. I'm saying, I think we can reduce the need for PADs if we make some changes to building height in multifamily and industrial. Obviously, we can't make that change tonight, so if that sounds like on the right track, we can go do the proper research, do the comparison to the other cities, and bring forth a zoning ordinance text amendment. Setting that aside, again, we kind of basically have 2 options. Either adopt the 100% cost recovery fee or adopt a lower fee, possibly adopt the hard rezoning fee for our PUD overlay.
Sherry?
Okay, I guess I agree with like option 2.5 between 2 and 3. So when we get to 3 and we figure that out and we update everything, that might be the good way to transition into that. But for tonight, I think Bill's over there doing the figures, so I'd like to see what Bill's average, Olympic throw out the highest score, throw out the lowest score, go with that type of thing is. And I think that's probably a good place to land.
Bill?
Okay, so if you go back to the numbers slide, please. Again, not that it's not as dramatic this time as it was last time, but if you throw out that 3540, which is pretty low in comparison, the average now is 6966. I would prefer a different set of numbers, so somewhere out of that, but yeah, if you do 6970, for example, then that puts us at the average for that. I would always be a huge supporter of changing the zoning rules, especially if we haven't touched them in 22 years, to get it updated. I thought it was unusual that we were seeing these for, we'd like to get 3 more feet or 5 more feet. It never dawned on me to ask the question about how old are the zoning, rules were. That are we that far behind compared to the quote unquote modern building standards? So I definitely would be in support of making those changes as well. There is no way that I can emotionally or intellectually support a greater than $10,000 fee for a PAD, especially when we're causing it. You know, if someone says, hey, I want to build something that is much different than what we have, then by all means. But I think our fee, I don't think we'll see a lot of them if we keep it around that 7,000 mark.
Brannon, are you there? Brannon? All right, what's it? Laura?
I like the idea of the revised average and also the adoption or of the option 3 to see what we can do administratively and revise the 22-year-old requirements.
Next.
Yeah.
Molly?
Katie, would your revisions come back to us?
Yes, they-
22-1? Because as long as I've been on council, I've always asked for higher heights. And I could never get anyone to tell me why we couldn't have higher heights other than it was in the rules. It was in,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, we
had a problem.
rarely say no, it's just which process do they have to do. But yes, we basically, what we'll do is we'll go back and get the comparison, where are the other cities with their heights?
Yeah.
And we have to do a zoning ordinance text amendment, so council has to make this decision. But we'll bring the detailed research of,
that's
this is
great.
what the heights are for the other cities, so that
Okay.
we're,
Because we do want to
in
be
line.
competitive with all of them, and as you
Yeah.
said, with the new, the way that they're moving items and building the buildings, and the taller buildings are the ones that they need, because we almost, I mean, we didn't get the little homes that are being built, you know, out at the airport. They had to go somewhere else because they could have a higher building than what we allowed for them, and we need to address that. So,
Joe?
Yeah, I echo what Councilmember Stipp was saying, so I agree with Bill.
I agree with a lot that's being said. The one thing that hits my mind all the time, so tell me how much effect this has on our economic development. Does any of this zoning that you can think of, that when a company comes, trying to get the company, I don't know, I would just want to make sure that none of this hits a negativity for economic development. So I don't know.
May I ask,
Yeah.
Mayor, if I may just ask Lori to come up and answer that?
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. Certainly, rezoning does affect some of the projects that we have in terms of the timing. Sometimes hard zoning is the way to go, and other times the PAD gives us a little bit more flexibility. But the fee structure, certainly the higher the fees, they have a lot of other options, and especially those that are cost conscious. Certainly look at the bottom line. Overall, we have not seen any significant resistance to the current fees and the current way things are processed.
Thank you. Appreciate that answer. Go ahead.
thank you. And again, if it's okay with council, it's a similar fee. I would ask that we set the subsidized fee as equal to the hard rezoning fee, just so that the numbers are similar and
Sure.
it makes it easy to administer. And I also just want to note, this is, I wrote up their PAD rezone, but are comparing the PAD overlay. The standalone big, thick PADs that we sometimes do for the big master plan communities is a whole other thing, and we are more in line with the other communities on those. It was just this type that we saw we were different from the other communities. But those are rare. Those big big plan communities are more rare. But that's what I had. I think we got all of our direction.
Oh,
Yes,
yes.
Mayor, if I may just encapsulate that. So we'll set the fees, as just Katie was alluding to, with the same as the general standard
Yeah.
rezoning, straight rezoning fee. And then council is asking us to change the standards to reduce the number of PADs that move forward.
Anything else for them before they're off? Thank you very much. So we're almost finished with the work session agenda. We're going to go on a special meeting, but now is the time of council having a comment, accommodation, reports, current events, requests for future items. I knew you would put your hand up. Wally?
Oh, yes, I have to share this. I went through the 3-minute car wash today, Lori.
Good.
There was not a line, but if there had been a line, we would have been able to get in and out without bothering Del Taco at all. It was perfect. And it was, I encourage everyone to go in and get a free car wash.
Yeah, I
You
saw
just
that.
drive up, push the button, pick what wash you want, and it keeps saying free, free, free. And you just drive through. It's free. It is free. And it's lovely. And the folks there were so nice, and they're so happy to see people. So thank you for putting the notice out, Lori, and I hope our residents, now everybody's going to rush for a free car wash, but it's located on Estrella Parkway right next to Del Taco.
So you were first with recreation, and
Oh,
now
yeah.
you're first with the
Well,
car
my
wash.
car was dirty.
We're noting that. There has to be
Okay.
a ribbon for that, or a
Oh, my
star or
gosh.
something, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Any city manager, anything to report? Well, since everything is finished, I'm going to adjourn this, and then we'll have a special meeting and an executive next. Meeting adjourned. Thank you. Those were great conversations.
Thank you all.
So are we moving, or are we staying in this? I'd like to call the special meeting order for July 1st, 2021. We have one member missing from this, so Brandon will not be in on this. Is that correct? So I need a motion and a second to excuse Councilman Hampton. Do I hear that motion?
Second.
All right, I heard a motion from Councilman Campbell and a second from Councilman Zillo. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Council, upon roll call vote, we can convene into executive session as posted of the following. Pursuant to the ARS 38-431.03, A3 and 7, consultation with the city's attorney and the city manager to receive legal advice on an update regarding the options for the possible acquisition of a real estate for public use, generally located near the intersection of Bullitt Avenue and Lower Buckeye Road. I'd like a motion, a second to go in executive session. Do I hear that motion?
So moved.
Second.
I heard a motion from Councilman Stepp and second from Councilman Pizzello. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. We will now convene in executive session.